The African diaspora and its effects are seen worldwide in its descendants and the cultures resulting from it. The African diaspora was the dispersion of millions of African people to colonized countries due to the transatlantic slave trade that took place from around 1500 to 1800. After the arrival of African people to the colonized countries they were forcibly brought to, the debate for their rights began. White people stressed the idea that Black and Native people were dirty, savagerous, and overall pictured as less human so as to uplift themselves and gain power and status. The results of this can still be seen and is evident in current politics, beauty standards, and other aspects of American culture. The Civil Rights Movement is considered to have started in 1954 and end in 1968, though the fight for civil rights of Black people in America went for much longer than just 14 years. Since the abolishment of slavery in 1865, Black people in America fought to be recognized and treated as equals to their white counterparts. Not only did we have to protest for simple rights already guaranteed in the Constitution, but to be regarded and treated as human. For context, the inhumane treatment of Black and other people of color began before slavery. Prior to slavery in America, Native people of non-European countries were conquered and killed by European colonizers, i.e. the mass genocide of Native American people in the Americas. The tragedies acted on people of color continued after slavery as well, with public lynchings, casual murders, and other blatant acts of violence and prejudice. Without Black people bringing light to these acts, with protests, petitions, and other public acts of disapproval, there would have never been any progress made in regards to the rights of Black people in America. As the Civil Rights Movement grew, and groups such as the Black Panther Party and NAACP were established, white people began to listen and some began to agree, thus creating an even bigger debate. Not only were Black people fighting for their freedoms, but some white people were as well. When people of the oppressive group recognize injustice taking place, it gains credibility in the eyes of other people within said group. Essentially, when people of a quote-unquote higher status join together to support a cause, its recognition grows exponentially. In the case of racism and civil rights in America, white people with more privilege began to support the Civil Rights Movement, which caused it to be taken more seriously and considered a worthy cause. Though much progress has been made since the days of slavery, its effects on Black people remain. The fight for civil rights still isn't over, which is made clear by the Black Lives Matter protests, in which people spoke out about the constant murder of Black people by police officers and other federal workers, which can be traced back to the systematic oppression and bias against Black people in the criminal justice system.
As citizens of a democracy, we have certain civil rights. While the idea of civil rights has evolved over time, they must continue to evolve in order to keep up with our ever-changing society. The distinguishable gap in rights between people of different races in America existed long before the country's fight for independence, and it still exists now, shown by recent events such as continuing construction of the wall on the U.S.-Mexican border. Though there haven't always been chains, shackles, and whips, there have been other significant methods of division and hatred across the country. The Constitution states that all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Though this is contradicted by many acts against people of color in America's history. Many movements in the past have fought for the rights of their community, which makes it easier for the people that comes after them. It's thanks to people like Martin Luther King, Helen Keller, and Rosa Parks, who use events like the March on Washington, the Montgomery bus boycott, and the Little Rock Nine to raise awareness about inequality. Despite their freedom from slavery, African Americans faced legal discrimination throughout the 1900s. This included school segregation, wage gaps, and discrimination in recreational places. The Civil Rights Movement was an attempt to bring these concerns to politicians and the public's notice. In 1963, the March on Washington, D.C. was a scheduled movement promoted heavily by Martin Luther King, who was the main speaker. African Americans in the South yearned for an end to segregation and Jim Crow legislation. They desired to be treated properly and to have an equal opportunity to receive employment. The march was a nonviolent demonstration that brought these problems to the attention of the Washington politics. The Montgomery bus boycott was a crucial point in the Civil Rights Movement. It was a sign that a peaceful protest may lead to laws being changed to preserve the equal rights of all individuals regardless of race. The Montgomery bus boycott brought racial segregation into the spotlight of American politics. The laws were set on June 4, 1956. Because of the boycott, Black people were now allowed to sit anywhere they pleased on the bus. The United States Supreme Court decided in 1896 that segregated schools were allowed. This meant that schools for white children and schools for Black children could exist. However, Black children's schools were not as good, and many people believed this was wrong. Although the Little Rock Nine's actions had negative consequences, they did enable the South desegregation of public schools to take a big step ahead. To conclude, the Civil Rights Movement provided a platform for African Americans to voice their frustration with oppression, racism, and discrimination they faced in the workplace and other areas. The Civil Rights Movement, as well as all of its well-known activities, assisted them in achieving equal job opportunities.